Okay, take two. Here we are. Let's see if this works. Hi, Becky. Okay, let's see. He's joining. Joanna. Let's see if we can get you this time.
Okay. Whew.
Becky, you're in. Okay.
I'm in. So maybe some of our people are back too. Oh, yay!
Hi.
Yay!
Amazing.
It was worth it. It was worth it. And Nancy Edmondson is still here, so I'm so happy.
Definitely.
Okay.
Okay, so I was actually, I was just going to do a short intro and then we'll ask you some questions. We want to let everyone know who you are because there have been so many stories in the media over the past few years. We're not going to mention names, but talking about journeys from religion and like people losing religion. And then I stumbled across your story, which is the reverse. And I thought to myself, this is incredible. More stories need to be told like this. And we wanted to just share it, get it out there. So yeah, tell us about you and tell us about who you are and your documentary and where it all started.
Sure. I'll keep an abridged version. But essentially, I'm a filmmaker in LA. I had sort of been stumbling through my 20s, trying to be important and be respected, and I think just try to make it. And as an Israeli-born creative, and I grew up in Philadelphia and had made my way out to LA, I had a lot of Jewish upbringing and Israeliness at the core of who I was. It was just very underexplored. And so, of course, walking around in LA, not really connected to my deeper self, got to me. It got to me. And at the same time as it got to me, my younger sister, my only sister, Gal, gets engaged to a non-Jew, which like hits me right at the core of my own existential crisis, because underexplored, already trying to figure out who she is and stumbling around in LA, it all just hit me at once. And I felt so bumped by her decision. I felt like this must be so wrong. This doesn't feel right. And then I felt very judgmental for judging her. So, of course, naturally, as the big sister does, I made a documentary about it because that was the way I deal. I was like, this is such an interesting story. What's the deal with interfaith marriage? I must not be the only person struggling with the question of why marry Jewish and why am I being bumped by somebody in my family not marrying Jewish? And little did I know that really that was an underexplored topic filmically, like interfaith marriage wasn't being explored in that way. But not only that, that wasn't actually what my movie was about. And I had a major twist, both in the movie and in my personal life, which actually became one and the same, where I realized the question I was asking, why marry Jewish, was not at all the question in my heart. There was a deeper question that was lying dormant, waiting sort of to be birthed. And that question was, why be Jewish? I would never know how to answer why marry Jewish until I knew my answer to why be Jewish. And suddenly I found myself turning right, heading to Neve in Jerusalem to an Orthodox seminary where if you had told me that that was where I would be 5-10 years before, I would have laughed and said, well, you clearly don't know me. And my life changed in such an, I mean, I have chills every time I tell it because it's just such a powerful journey that I totally didn't see coming and that we captured on camera. And we have a 66-minute film now that's out in the world that has been really, and I'm just so humbled, has been sweeping the Jewish film festivals and the non-Jewish film festivals as well. And I even just this morning got a message from someone who watched it yesterday and was like, I'm so moved by this. I saw something else on Netflix and this is so not like that. It's so refreshing to have a story like yours. And I'm just so happy that my existential crisis makes sense to someone and that it's inspiring. So yeah, that's where I am now. I'm still creating content, but definitely seeing this passion project, American Birthright, out in the world and trying to get it in front of as many eyeballs to have others inspired like I was.
Yes, it's truly fabulous because as Bracha said, there's so much glamorization of the other way around. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's really been, you know, people go, you know, or being suffocated, and it's so nice to hear the stories from another perspective.
Well, it's become so like sexy and cool to sort of like make religion the thing that no one does anymore. Like we all do what we want, and I kind of I know that, like I know that motto. It very much ran my life, especially in LA, as I do what feels good to me, and I'm led by my truth. And when I realized that maybe my truth was not true at all, and that there is a truth with a capital T, like as soon as I connected to that, and I was like, wow, there is something bigger. And we really all do, like Rabbi David Aaron says in the movie, we all long to belong to something that's bigger than ourselves. All of us do. And we just don't want to listen to that call. And we need to glamorize that. Like we need to glamorize truth. We need to hold each other accountable to not the doing whatever we want, because look at where that's led us. Like look at how we see it everywhere, and people are much more attuned to that now. And I think that's why maybe the movie is having the feedback, is seeing that feedback, because people are hungry for it now. They're like, okay, we're over with the let's do whatever we want.
Right. And what I love about it is it's a very honest journey. It's a very honest question. And it's the hard question to ask yourself, like, what is the truth? You know, if I really, really want to find out the answer, then I'm going to have to ask myself some difficult questions. Yeah. And it's a very nuanced journey that you take. And I feel it without an agenda, which as well is beautiful. Like you didn't know where you were going to end up when you started, did you?
No, and it was very difficult to make a movie that way, by the way, because people initially, when reaching out for interviews, people would want to know, well, what's your thing? What's the message? And I didn't have one. And as a filmmaker, that felt sort of interesting. And especially as a writer, you sort of already know your through line. I didn't have that. I really wanted to be present moment by moment and figure it out. And the right people really did gravitate towards that. They really felt me and knew that was true. And you get to see that. You get to see it really play out, which I'm so glad I have.
Mm-hmm. It's a very beautiful documentary, as in it's very, sometimes we have these programs about Jewish and religion and we just seem like freaks in obviously a good way, but it's the way that this is portrayed is your journey, and it's your beautiful kind of sensitive journey towards what you're looking for, which is your truth, as you said, because that's what it is. And it's very, it's like beautifully done. Like I've watched lots of films and I'm very into it. You know, it's really special. It's really special.
It's so nice. It really is so nice to hear that, because of course I was in starting the film, I didn't want to really be in it. I just wanted to like facilitate interviews. And I had just a lot of people sort of like pulling me more and more in front of the camera. We had such a tough time pulling footage of me. We had to recreate some stuff, and you see it in the finished film where we created a whole series where I reflect in a red dress after the fact, because I didn't really see the movie being about my journey. I thought it was going to be about my sister. And so I'm glad that honesty was there and that vulnerability was there, because I think that is what we're looking for. We want to find our own shade of Jew and of any religion, I think. And I've had non-Jewish friends really respond to the film as well, which was very exciting. Not only in that they were like educated about Judaism through it, they were like, I learned so much. That was really interesting. I had no idea that's why women covered their hair. Oh, or that's why women covered their, or whatever it was, about Shabbat and kosher, about God, about halacha, about Torah. In a very short period of time, I certainly didn't do all of Jewish wisdom justice in the film, but just to educate a little bit and normalize that the journey does not look one way is so important. It's so
100%. So can you tell us a little bit more about your experiences of being Jewish growing up? What did being Jewish mean to you, from your childhood?
That's such a good question, because I think for me, being Jewish meant, in terms of my personal experience, was being Israeli. That's how I connected my Jewishness in America is, there's an American Jew, and that I sort of like was trying to figure out what that looked like. It was very regional. It was very geographic. It was like, if you were from Philly, you were sort of like this kind of Jew. If you're from New York, you had this kind of accent and these sort of values. And I was a foreigner. So for me, being Israeli was what made me, I felt like what made me the sort of Jew that I was. And we're traditional. You know, my mom was raised Orthodox, and I talk about it a bit in the film. She was sort of like the black sheep that ran from it, and not in a bad way. She very much is still a part of her family, but she raised us conservative. And so we had a flavor, we had the taste of Shabbat, we had the holidays. I went to summer camp. We were very Zionistic. We went to, you know, Hebrew school. I was bat mitzvahed. I was active as a teenager in BBYO, and in college, I went, you know, I went to the local Hillel on campus, and I went on a Met trip. So I was certainly drawn to it, but my Judaism was very regional. It was like Israel, Haifa, and then also Philly, where I grew up. It wasn't any deeper than that. It was sort of just like how I related to the people around me, whether it was the language or sort of the tribal things that we did. If it was camp, it was the singing and the food and the experiences. But I didn't taste the depth or the spirituality, I think, that I was craving. And that's what led me deeper and deeper and deeper in my 20s, because I knew there was more. Like I knew there had to be more for this tradition to have been sustained for this long in this sort of way. Like I just had a sense that there was more, and I'm glad that I went sort of carving and knocking and probing to find that, because that made all the difference in my Jewish experience.
It's so interesting because I live in Israel now. So, you know, it's just so different. Like, you know, you're there, you're in the country, so I can see the Israelis, they're just living it. But once you step out of that bubble, and if that's the only thing, it must be much hard. Like, you have to, you know, I suppose that's why, you know, when you're outside Israel, you have to do more. You have to search more. If you're like, it's very. Did the route that you took and how you found yourself feeling surprise you?
Yeah. I mean, aside from when I said, obviously, I never saw myself studying in a seminary, I really, so when I hit the turning point, and it was like, you know, I was stuck at this point. I thought the movie would end at my sister's wedding, and it would be this like beautiful button, and I would know the movie was over. And I didn't, because my sister got married, and the movie was like not even a journey, really. I hadn't gotten to any clarity. I was still very much sort of looking out and trying to have somebody tell me what was right. No rabbi or sociologist or philosopher was going to say interfaith marriage is wrong and this is why. They all really encouraged me to think for myself, which was really frustrating because I didn't want to think for myself. And so when I hit that stalemate, I realized I hadn't been sitting with any Orthodox rabbis by choice, because that wasn't my go-to. It's not how I grew up, and it wasn't my comfort zone. I didn't know who to turn to. And I also sort of thought I already knew what they were going to tell me. I'm going to sit with an Orthodox person, and they're going to say, oh, no, she's married out of tradition, and she's doomed. You know, you should cut her off, never talk to her, and sit Shiva, like she's dead, you know? And so I didn't want to sit with an Orthodox rabbi. I had a major aversion. And then there was like that other small voice in the back of my mind that's like, your family in Israel is Orthodox. You don't know anything about the tradition. Don't you feel like maybe before you say, just see? I'm sure there's like and as a documentarian, you want to have this be well-rounded. You can't just sit with every other denomination and not sit with the Orthodox Jews. Like, that's not fair. So I really wanted to positively represent the entire tradition. And when I was referred to Rabbi Ben-Zion Klatzko and several others, that was a major turning point, because I felt seen in a different way. I just got chills. Rabbi Klatzko, when sitting with him, I felt so safe, and I felt like all the wisdom was there. I felt like all of my answers were there. He wasn't going to give them to me, but he had them. And he understood me, and then he encouraged me to speak with another writer in LA. And that writer and I, Michael Borokow, intellectually sparred for about 45 minutes, and he helped me to see that my journey was about me. And I remember that moment in his office when I really felt that. And I was like, okay. And I walked out feeling very like sort of heavy, but energized. I knew the movie was heading in a different direction. And I had to tell this differently to make this the film it needed to be. And from then on, it was like running full speed. I felt so like responsible for the audience that would eventually watch the film, for them to watch the right journey, but the journey that I was really meant to go on, the deeper journey, the harder journey. And it pushed me. The movie definitely pushed me to make that journey happen for myself too.
And you felt it. I felt that. You could feel that through the movie.
Yeah. That was a major moment. You speaking to Rabbi Klatsko,
Yeah.
that you felt that it was a turning point. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of our next questions is, who were some of the people you met who influenced you along the way? You mentioned Rabbi Klatsko, Rabbi David Aaron. Who were some of the others?
Yeah, I mean, Rav Daniel Katz is a huge one as well. He was the one that really, I wanted someone to tell me on a spiritual level, like really at a soul level, what was the impact of interfaith marriage. Because I don't think that's something that, it's very much a practical conversation when you get into the nuance of interfaith marriage and how to make something like that work in a Jewish setting. And so there's a lot of things you sort of have to go. And I was like, okay, fine, all the practicality aside, at a soul level, what goes on. And our interview, you have maybe like 6-7 bites from him in the film, but our interview was 4 hours long. And it was like, oh yeah, it was like a journey in itself. And I just really got the answers from him on many levels. It felt like, we sort of started out on a physical plane, and we just, by the end, I was like floating. And to have that experience was really cool. It was like I'd been to a meditation before, but this felt like a meditation. And I felt that way with many of the people I sat with and learned from. Rabbi David Aaron too. That was an hour-long interview, but by the end I was like, what was that? Like, that was more, I downloaded more wisdom than I had in many classes, like entire term classes in college. So I was just really inspired, really, really inspired. And I had a friend, he was one of the DPs, and he said, I definitely know intellectually and spiritually why Judaism is my path. And he goes, but sometimes I look around and I say, if all those smart people are doing it, and I laughed because I got that. Like when I sat with these people and they were so thoughtful and so deep and had answers, but had sensitivities. I just I'd never seen that anywhere else like that. And I said, if they're so bought in, either they're incredible actors or they've really tasted something, and I want to taste that too. I owe it to myself now to at least taste that.
Mm-hmm. Incredible.
Are you still in contact with some of these people? Like, do you still have conversation? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just talking to Rav Daniel
That'll be
today.
A follow-up documentary.
That's what he asked me. He said, what's the follow-up? So, a part of me wants to release some never before seen interviews. We had a round table with Rebbitzin Heller and Rabbi Edelstein, which are just the giants of Neve. And so not everything got to make it into the film. So much stuff lives on the cutting room floor. And so eventually we'll do that. But certainly follow-ups and a part 2 and 3, but there's still work to do with this documentary first. And it's nice when they share it and they're very proud of it as well, because I know it's not just me, it's all of our collective energies around this movie together. And that's really important.
You mentioned
it was coincidental that you started making this before all the negative media portrayals came out, wasn't it? It's not a response to that, is it?
Oh, not at all. I mean, I started this 7 years ago, and I wanted to have it out. It was 2 years ago, but it was a very different movie, and I knew it wasn't right. And then I also had a feeling, a subtle one, the world doesn't want it now. That's why you're not ready. That's why you have to re-edit it. And we made a completely different film. We probably made 10 different versions of this movie before this version came out, which is just how editing is. It's just so crazy. But once it was ready and we were finished, all that stuff came out in the media. I was like, how interesting. Well, there you go.
The world needs to hear it. Yeah.
And what's interesting, it caused such a debate. I think it really antagonized people on either side of the fence. It really got people wound up, that people were portrayed, the religious community was portrayed like that.
Right.
Some of the things that were said were, not sure where they were from, but, but also it kind of, you know, these kind of things, this kind of film is a positive portrayal of you finding or whatever truth you found throughout. But it's really, it needs to be done, this positive, because there's so many things that are maybe showing things a bit negative. It's like, you know,
Yeah.
we need.
I agree.
It's just refreshing to ask the questions, what's the other side of the story? You know, even if there's no hard and fast answer, you know, people might be expecting that. They might be surprised that I found the film was quite nuanced. It doesn't necessarily give you any hard and fast rules, but it's refreshing to ask those questions.
You have to. I think no one ever changed because they were judged. And so if it was this very harsh, everyone must do this fire and brimstone, which is just not my MO, it's just not my brand, to use LA language, that isn't what works for me. But I think the most inspiring is to see people on a journey, on a truth-seeking journey that looks exciting and fun and tough, but also supported by others and community. Who doesn't want to be a part of that? Like, everyone wants to pack their bags and go and find themselves deep down, young, middle-aged, old. Literally, no age holds you back. And we're always in iterations of that journey. So I went on that one. It was like my 20s journey. But I'm on another one now as a mother and a wife, you know, and I'm sure I'll be on another one we're constantly journeying. And that's beautiful and it's rich and it should be more normalized, and it's something that happens all the time in the Jewish tradition that's not made beautiful, and that the nuance and the diversity of the approach is not shown in Judaism at all to the outside world.
We're always the wandering Jew.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned throughout there were a lot of turning points, like things people said, people did. So do you feel like it was a combination of factors, or do you think, you know, there was something? I mean, you mentioned before when you sat with, you know, Rabbi Klatzker that it really was a turning point, but was there anything else that you really can pinpoint?
Yeah, so there were many turning points, and I think if we look back, and I keep trying to even isolate others, everything is a mini. They're like micro turning points. But the larger turning points, I had another large turning point when I went back home to Haifa. And I think there is a magic in going back to where you were born and raised. You know, we also would have liked to go back and in a romantic, nostalgic way. But this was actually, for me, really important to step in the places I lived and to visit my grandparents' graves and to connect to the lineage that I came from. I think especially as a Jew, just to recognize, you know, my mom comes from a strong Moroccan background and my dad's side is Holocaust survivors. So just to remember, like, really the shoulders on whose, you know, the giants on whose shoulders I'm standing, for lack of a better sort of cliche, but it's really important one, that helped me. And to then, I felt responsible. And I say it in the film, I feel responsible to continue this thing in whatever way I'm supposed to. But I didn't come all this way and connect to my family and understand the tradition so deeply to then say, okay, like, I guess, never mind, none of this. I owed it. I owed it to myself and my family and to God to do it right.
It's so interesting because every day we kind of say we go back to our ancestral roots. And it's interesting that Bracha, you know, in London, they do this whole show on the BBC, like going back to your roots. So what's it called? So that's, you know,
yeah, who do you think you are?
Yeah,
you
and
explore
it's
who your grandparents did.
Yeah, this concept of where we come from is so incredibly important. And it's very interesting. This intermarriage has been happening for, you know, interfaith marriages have been happening for a long time. It's not new now. But, you know, even, you know, years ago when I was discussing it with friends, and a lot of times, like people who came from as kind of families that were traditionally Jewish, but not religiously, they were like, why should I marry Jewish? And it always came back to like the Holocaust or things like that. So it's interesting to see the journey, you know, why it's so important, the lineage. Like, you know, it's a powerful, I think it's a very subtle, your film is subtle and beautiful and raw and all these words and poignant, because you don't put it in the face. You don't like shove it down the face.
Good.
You kind of do it in a very subtle way, which maybe is what we need at this moment, because that we're too scared to talk about certain things, even though the glamorization of the other way is completely fine. But that we're too kind of worried what we're going to say and what we're going to do, and is that going to offend? It's it's an interesting balance.
It is. We're afraid of the dogma, but then we have so much other dogma that we live by outside of religious dogma. So it's really interesting that they'll even call a religious framework religious dogma at all, and why that is. And I think if we don't pick that apart for ourselves, we keep walking around with these constructs our whole lives, and we never really explore anything beyond what we think is comfortable. And that's just the comfort zone. We're all human, so we all walk around with a comfort zone. And I think it's just, we've come to a point where humanity's like, okay, this isn't great. And we're willing, at least a little bit, to explore some of the corners where before we were like, absolutely not. And I always say, why not? Like, what are you afraid of? Rav Daniel Katz has a line where he says, when the whisper calls to you, don't you dare bury it. Because when you bury that, you bury your hope. And when you kill your hope, you kill your future. And yes, that's a little like, and it definitely hit me, where I was glad I heeded the call. But when you get that whisper, when you hear that whisper, don't bury it, explore it. And really just ask yourself, what are you afraid of? I'm constantly asking myself that with every next step, with every growth point in my life. What are you really afraid of? Ends up being nothing.
It's very brave. Not everyone does that. It's a very brave thing to do, to be very honest and ask yourself those questions. So our final question for you is, which was the hardest part of the process for you?
The hardest part absolutely was the post-production, the editing. I think there's a lot of fire and excitement in, like, when you have an idea, there's that, first flash of light and you're like, yes. And then you get the validation, which was really nice. Fine, I didn't have much money, but I made it happen somehow. And then I had all of the film, and then I finally got all the stuff that I needed. Sitting down with 150 hours of footage, over years and years and years of filming, about 4 years of filming, was really grueling. It was like very daunting. I remember in the beginning, my editor, Aaron, and I sat down and we were like, where do we start? And my Aaron, who you see in the film, is not Jewish, so it was really helpful to have her lens. And I also told her, I do not want this to feel like Bible camp. Like, I don't want it to feel exactly the way you're saying it didn't feel, thank God, because that's not it. Like, that's not the film. How do I make the journey come to life? And it took us years. It took us years and years, and the feedback is really difficult. The process of getting feedback is really hard, because everyone has an opinion, and you have to know whose opinion resonates and whose opinion you're just going to say thank you, not that, which is akin to a spiritual journey. Not everyone's your rabbi, and sometimes you'll get a piece of Torah that you're like, I don't know, for some reason that's not hitting. And so it was very similar to my journey of learning, in that I had to make a movie, and that also shaped me and molded me and beat me down and all of that for a couple of years. And then when we finally got the film together, it was right before I gave birth to my daughter, and I really feel like I birthed the film. Like, I felt like it was like a whole, I was like, I don't know which one was harder. I honestly don't know.
Wow.
So yeah, the toughest was post-production, but it was so worth it. So worth it.
Because it really, it took a long time.
So glad you persevered with it.
Yeah, me too.
It took
the
film
has received critical acclaim at festivals across the world. Which festivals have you shown at?
So many. So I see someone asking, what is the film? It's called American Birthright, and we'll type it down. But AmericanBirthrightFilm.com has all of our laurels. We're at Miami. We're in Seattle. all the Jewish film festivals, essentially. Philadelphia, we just had a live screening. San Francisco, these are like some of the giants in the Jewish film festival world. We're screening live at the West Virginia Jewish Festival, Charleston. We are at Spokane. We are in Rutgers. So many more. We're getting a hand. We're at like 14 at this point with new as well. So people can definitely check the movie out at the festival circuit, or they can also reach out via the website if they like a private opportunity to see it in the meantime.
Amazing. And we are very excited to announce that we are going to be hosting a screening on our site between the 26th of December and the 2nd of January. So people can buy tickets and view. They can start buying tickets. Hopefully we'll have them up on the site this week. You can pre-book. And then all through that week, 26th to the 2nd, you can view the film on our site. Highly recommended. Lots of shivers down the spine moments. We found it really, really interesting.
So I'm so excited to see what everyone thinks too. So I'm very eager. I'll have to do a bunch more lives and hear feedback.
Definitely. We love collaborating with you, Becky.
Likewise.
Thank you for making time to speak with us.
Absolutely.
And we'll be in touch soon.
Sounds great. We'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Bye. Bye.